All right, so let's see what some of the audience here has to say at the Writers Store today.
Okay. Hi. Okay, so I'm curious about the process of writing a spec for a TV show. As long as you're following the rules that have been set up for the characters, like not taking them to some place they'd never be seen, how radical can you get? And is that better when you're trying to pitch something? And then also, what are you working on now that you're excited about?
Okay, so you're talking about writing a spec episode of an established television show?
Yes.
Okay, not pitching it, but actually sitting down and writing it.
Yeah, but eventually going to pitch it or show it to someone.
Yeah. If you're writing a spec episode, first thing to know is that if you're writing a spec episode of a television show, that's the only show you cannot use that spec episode for. I know that's so if, for example, if you want to write Grey's Anatomy, actually want to get in and pitch to Grey's Anatomy, write for Grey's Anatomy, don't write a Grey's Anatomy spec. Write a private practice spec. So you should write a show that's going to be on the air for a while. You should write one you know and like. And then you should try to conform as much as possible to the rules of the show. So you watch a bunch of episodes, time out the acts, understand how long they are, conform to that. And then as far as character and how radical you can go, well, don't be boring, right? That's the first rule. But beyond that, you're right. You shouldn't kill regulars. You shouldn't marry them off. You shouldn't end big plot lines that you know that they're going through. So we really don't. You would not, I'll just keep going to Grey's Anatomy as my example du jour. I have no idea why. But you don't do Meredith and Shepard's wedding. That would be a bad idea. You need to play in their sandbox. Don't break the walls of their sandbox. But do be interesting. Have fun. Don't do a show that's all about the guest star, though. That's the other rule. So never do a show that's primarily about a guest star. I can't remember who, but one of the writers for Happy Days wrote a very clever script about Richie interacting with a cop. Gave a lot of good lines to the cop. And one of the head writers on the show said, this cop, we're going to pay him a day player rate. Maybe we'll pay him $5,000 for the entire episode. I'm paying Henry Winkler $50,000 an episode, and you didn't give him any scenes. So don't write about that cop. Write about the Fonz. That's who people are coming in to see. So write to the main characters. Give them really good stories. Give them something psychologically at stake. Put them through a little bit of hell, and you'll probably have a good episode of whatever you're writing. And if it's a procedural, just come up with a good murder. You'll be fine. What I'm working on right now is a lot of things. I'm doing. I just finished writing a mini series called Riverworld. It's going to be on the Sci-Fi Channel. They're starting to shoot it in March. It's an adaptation of a bunch of books by this guy named Philip Jose Farmer. They won the Hugo and Nebula Award, which in science fiction is a big deal. It's interesting, though, because we were talking about writing versus producing, and I'm only writing this one, which I haven't done in a long time. So it's literally like I finish the script, I throw it over to the trans, cross my fingers. So I think it'll be good. They've got a good director, and they're going to start casting soon. So I'm excited about that. And I'm also writing a pilot, and I'm starting another pilot, and I'm supervising a writer on another pilot. So I have 3 pilots as well. So that's what I'm doing these days. Yeah.
Hi, this is more of a comment, actually. I wanted to, since you mentioned picking up the Robert Heinlein juveniles when you were a kid. Yeah, back in the 50s when I was the only kid in the whole world who knew about Robert Heinlein, found him at the library and was just really digging it. And all those years of being all alone and then finally finding somebody else who loved Robert Heinlein. And 50 years later, here I am, part of a worldwide internet community where I find out that somebody who was also doing this as a kid is going to tell me about being part of the people who make all this wonderful, the films and the TV shows. And this is very exciting.
Well, here's the thing about, Heinlein when he wrote those juvies, and a lot of other, I think a lot of people can identify with being that kind of slightly lonely kid and going to the library and finding somebody. Now, it's not always Heinlein, but for a lot of kids it was Heinlein. He wrote those, they were great. He wrote these juvies, they were aimed for young kids, but sometimes it's Ursula K. Le Guin, sometimes it's Judy Blume for a lot of girls. It's Tolkien. It's whoever gets you excited about storytelling, and that to me, Heinlein was one of the people who did that. And I think that you know, one of the things I love about our world today is, you know, someone said that their two great heroes were J.K. Rowling and Barack Obama, because J.K. Rowling got his kids to read and Barack Obama got them to vote. I think that there's a great rediscovery. I hope that it goes beyond just reading the Harry Potter books, but I think one of the great things that those kinds of stories do, the Heinlein stuff, the Rowling stuff, is they get kids interested in reading and maybe also in writing. And I think that that's a really, really big blessing. It's funny because the novel I'm working on, which I've been working on since the strike, because I had nothing better to do except pick it and write a novel, is a YA. It's a young adult. And I sort of did that on purpose for two reasons. One is I figured if I was finally going to finish a novel, I should do one that was short, and YAs are 50 to 75,000 words, which is not as scary as 125,000 words. And I just thought maybe I could someday be the writer who that kid found in their local library and started reading that. That would be cool.
You have actually written books. You have written a book before.
I've written a book. I co-wrote with Ira this crazy little book called Legends of the Ferengi, which was a bunch of like Ferengi mitzvahs, little Ferengi stories that were about the rules. And they were all like a page long. It's a great toilet reading book if you still want to grab. I don't think it's out of print, but I'm sure you could find it on Amazon. It got 5 stars from a rabbi who read it. It was not just a rabbi who was a folklore professor who said it was one of the funniest books he ever read. Maybe he's the only guy who thought that, but anybody else?
Do we have any more questions? There we go.
Do you have a passion project that you'd love to see made?
Oh, I have so many. The feature that I wrote right before the strike. Well, first of all, the Serpent and the Eagle that Hans and I wrote together, which is the story of the Aztec conquest. I want to see that written. I want to see that done so badly. But I did a insane. I'll tell you what it's about. What the hell? Somebody could call me. You never know. I did another historical. I did a movie, a script called The Book of Judas. And it is the story of Yeshua bar Miriam, told from the point of view of Yehuda Sicarii, Judas Iscariot. He's the hero, sort of. But what I love about the project is very few people know a lot about this guy. He's very obscure, but he's one of the most well-known people in all of history, literature, whatever floats your boat, make your choice. But I tried to put him in a historical context. Yehuda Sicarii, Iscariot, theoretically, according to a lot of people, means Judas the knife. So what Judas was he was a Hezbollah guy. He was a Hamas guy. He was a Jew who worked with the Sicarii, who were a terrorist group. And what the Sicarii would do is they would go into the markets with knives under it means curved knife. They would go into the markets with knives under their robes, and they would stab Roman sympathizers to death.
Wow.
So that's where that guy came from. That's who he was. He was a very bad guy. And he ended up being a disciple, a trusted one enough that Jesus gave him his money purse. And then he ended up betraying him. That's an interesting character. I mean, come on. Who doesn't want to know more about that guy? So I'd love to get that made someday.
Not a happy story.
Well, but in the end, Jesus saved the world, right? And Judas helped.
So far.
Sort of. He had a role to play. He had a job. He did his thing. And he learned a lesson.
Hi. What advice do you have for somebody who's written a sci-fi pilot and is trying to get it sold?
I get asked this a lot. I will be totally brutally honest with you. If you don't have a lot of credits, it's very, very difficult to sell a pilot. If you write a spec pilot as a guy who's out there and doesn't have some sort of body of work, what you've written is hopefully a very good sample that you can send to agents and have them send around to show what a good writer you are. The chances of you selling it and getting made into a series are very small. And that's because in television especially, the studios and the networks do not buy ideas or even execution of ideas. They buy people. They hire the people that they trust and know. And the reason that they do this is because if you're going to greenlight a TV series, you're going to spend $5, $6, $7 million on the pilot, and then if it goes to series, you're going to spend something on the order of 20 minimum $20 million and upwards to $40 or $50 million on that. So they want someone that they know, that they believe can handle that, right, to run the show. That's what they're really looking for. So if you've been on a show, if you've got some credits, your agent will try to get you that out and get it seen, and hopefully you can sell it. If you haven't been, then you should use that as a calling card, and you should write some more stuff. Don't just think, I wrote this great pilot, I'm done. No, sit down and now write a movie. Write a 2-hour movie. Then write a spec episode of something that's on the air right now. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. A very nice piece of advice, I believe it was Cynthia Whitcomb, who was one of my professors at UCLA. I went to the MFA program at UCLA. One of my professors is here. Is that when you sit down to write your first script, 10,000 other people say, you know what, I'd like to be a screenwriter. That month or that year or whatever. By the time you finished your first script, half of them have not finished it. Probably more than half, but let's just say half. There's 5,000 people you're competing with. When you sit down and write your next script, very few of them have done that. Let's say 1,000 of them have decided to do that. And then every time you write another script, half those people drop out. What that means is that by the time you write your 8th to 10th script as a freelance, as out there speccing without a job, you're probably the best unemployed writer in Hollywood. And then you'll probably get a job. So you got to keep at it. You've got to be persistent. You've got to be willing to suffer a while and work your way through it. I wrote 8 features before I got my first job, and I'd almost sold one. I'd had a couple heartbreakingly close calls. I had an agent. I had an agent for 5 years before I sold a script, and thank God they stuck with me.
Would you recommend one over another? So for a new screenwriter, somebody that's coming up that's writing their first spec, is it better for them to write an original spec, or is it better for them to spec a show that's already on the air?
There's pluses and minuses to either. Writing a spec pilot is good because it's evergreen. It never goes stale. You can dust it off and change the dates and maybe change a few pop references, and it's good again. If you wrote an episode of like Friends, 4 years ago, that was a great spec. Now it's basically worthless.
Right.
And so, if you had a tremendous amount of passion for Friends and you knew that show really well and you could come up with a lot of funny lines for those characters, well, God bless, go write an episode of that.
But the advice would be, if you're going to actually spec a series that's on the air, pick something that's popular and that isn't ending that season if you can.
Yeah, try to pick something that's been on the air for like 2 years and you think is going to be on the air for at least 3 more. Because the second that show goes off the air, your script is going to get stale. So right now, I keep saying Grey's Anatomy because it's probably a good show to spec right now. It's probably okay to spec a Mad Men. That'll probably be around for a while longer. It's probably okay to spec an Entourage. It's probably okay to spec a Big Bang Theory. I don't think that show is going to go anywhere. But I would not go and spec
the Dresden Files.
I wouldn't spec the Dresden Files. That's for damn sure. We're freaking canceled. I would not spec a Pushing Daisies. As much as I love that show, and as much as Brian's a terrific writer, and if there was any justice, that show would still be on the air.
I agree.
Specking a Pushing Daisies makes no sense because that show is going to diminish in the minds of the executives. You're writing a show that basically failed, and that's not a good spec. I personally spec pilots myself, but that's because I can sell pilots. So there's a reason why I do that.
Right.
But you have to write what you're passionate about. If you're passionate about writing something, it's going to be better than something where you're like, I don't really like Law and Order, but I guess I should spec one. Nah, it's going to suck. So try to spec a show you like.
Any other questions? Hold on.
Not so much of a question, just so I'm glad to see you here.
Professor Ackerman from UCLA.
But I've been there for some number of years, and see a lot of writers come through there. And occasionally, there are people who have a voice instantly, and it's not something that I've heard you really talk about. I don't know what's something you can talk about. It's something you've been talking with. But I just remember from the first script that you wrote in my class that you had one, and there was an individuality about it. And I'm not surprised to see you sitting here. So
well, thank you.
I'm happy to see it. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I think that part of the reason I'll go back to this because I'm all Gladwelled up on Outliers right now. But I think part of the reason I had a voice when I went into UCLA was because even though I'd never written a script, I had tried to write a novel. I'd written some short stories. None of them ever of any particular quality, but I'd been working at my craft before I showed up at the door, and I think that helped. I think that I'll tell you the other thing I think helped is because I am all outlired out, and he was talking about how rice farming helps you be good at math. But I worked in a comic book store when I was a kid. I worked in a science fiction bookstore, and we also sold role-playing games.
Sure.
So I was immersed in all that stuff, and I was reading it all, and I was playing these games too when I was a kid, and those are storytelling games. You had to make up characters and situations and stories and share them with your friends at least. So all of that was actually training in a weird way. It was practice being in a writing room, sitting around with your friends playing D&D. I know this is like geek world, but sitting around with your friends playing D&D is actually practice for being in a writing room, believe it or not, because you're doing something very similar to what happens in a writing room. You're throwing out ideas, you're talking story, you're creating characters together. And sometimes your friends like you, and sometimes they throw a Coca-Cola at your head. But there's an interaction with other storytellers. So if you have a son or daughter who wants to be a writer, get them hooked on D&D. Okay.
So make you a little nervous having one of your former professors here. You feel like you're going to be graded.
Yeah, I'm hoping for at least a pass fail.
Yeah, it's making me a little nervous too.
Yeah.
We have any other questions? All right,
Sure.
one more question.
On Andromeda, the 5th season. The last
There was a
season,
5th season
it was
of
the last
Andromeda?
the
There
last
must have been. I
season.
was still cashing the checks. Yeah.
Yeah, the last season. What were you going for, and did you actually?
What was I going for?
Well,
I got my ass fired off of Andromeda after a season and a half. On Andromeda, when I took the job, I was told that the pattern of the company that hired me was that they fired their showrunners after about 10 episodes. So if I was going to take this job, I should expect to be fired. And I lasted 30 episodes, so I think I did pretty good. I was going for something completely different from what they ended up doing on Andromeda. If you'd like to know what I was going to do, because I promised the fans, I wrote a little play. And there's a site called exile.net, exisle.net, net. And it's a sort of a media fan bulletin board of people who talk about television shows and movies and things like that. And there's an off-topic real-world discussion that's full of liberals and conservatives flaming each other. But that's on every bulletin board. There's a section on there called Industry Insider Updates, where I post sometimes, and at the very top there's a pinned thing that says Robert Wolfe's Coda. Coda is how I was going to end Andromeda. It's a like 30-page, maybe not even that, 20-page, one-scene play between Trance and Harper, where Trance tells Harper what the show was all about and what was going to happen.
A little alternate reality.
My
there.
own little alternate
There you
ending.
go.
It's my own. It's yeah, and I threw it off in like 2 hours, but I had promised the fans when I got fired, when I departed for creative differences, that I would, when the show was done, I would tell them what the original story was. Because when the show was on the air, there were people out there telling the story, and they were spending millions of dollars a year telling the story, and their story is just as valid as mine. If I get hired onto a show that's been going for a couple of years and suddenly I'm the head writer, well, I'm going to tell the story I want to tell. So why shouldn't they have told the story they wanted to tell? So I didn't want to detract from what they were doing, and I was still cashing the Creative By check, so I wasn't like giving them back. But that's how Andromeda was going to end.
Let me ask you one last question.
Yeah.
Gene Roddenberry,
Yeah.
Stephen King,
Yeah.
Jim Butcher, Philip Jose Farmer. These are all very prestigious writers whose material you've either adapted or worked with.
Yeah.
How does writing an adaptation compare to creating something original?
Well, hopefully you've got a little ammunition to begin with. Hopefully it's a little easier. It's like writing a historical versus coming up with something from whole cloth.
Right.
I mean, when I wrote the Book of Judas, I got to steal from God, which is pretty cool.
You have to give him royalties?
No. It's awesome. But hopefully they've given you ammo. Hopefully
Right.
they've given you a launching pad. So theoretically, it's a little easier. Now, there's sometimes traps because there's things they do that you can't do. There's internal dialogue or whatever else. Dresden Files is all first person. It's a detective
Right.
thing. So it's a tremendous amount of first-person narrative, so we had to do some voiceover to give that flavor. But hopefully you've gotten a launching pad, but it's their world, so you have to fall in love with it. You have to find enough in it that you love it enough to spend, hopefully, years working on it. And so that's if you're adapting something that you don't love, you shouldn't be doing it.
Right.
If you can't find that love, if you can't fall in love with someone else's work and someone else's world, this is the same thing if you get on staff on a TV show that you didn't create. Like Scott. I mean, Scott Peters created the 4400. But I found what I found. I really liked the story. I fell in love with the characters, and so I was able to invest in it emotionally and do that work. And that's so that's the challenge,
right,
and the benefit. The benefit is there's something there to love. The challenge is you need to find out what in it you love. I'm
going to keep looking at that IMDb page to see when it actually scrolls down to more than 2 pages. But I want to thank you very much for taking the time and being here with us today. Robert Hewitt Wolfe, thank you very much. And let me just say, we are live from the Writers Store in LA, California. I want to thank the Writers Store for allowing us to be here. Anything you need to know about writing, any material at all you want to find out, you want to be a writer, best place to come. You can't come in person. You can check them out online, writerstore.com. And thank the audience for being here. Thank you very much for being here with us live. Thank you for being with us at home and online. And once again, I want to invite you to come back next time when we pull back the curtain, go backstage, and into the right environment. Thank you, everybody.